My younger brother, Ethan, ruined my business startup plans, and it was the last straw for me. I cut off all contact with my toxic family. A few years later, they came crawling back, hoping to invest in my now thriving business. But I just laughed and showed them the door. I am 33 years old now, and I have not spoken to my parents in over 3 years. The fallout started when Ethan, who is 30 now, talked my parents into backing out of investing in my business at the last minute. Their decision left me high and dry after I had already quit my job. To be perfectly honest, I have never liked Ethan, and it is not just because of that betrayal. I have despised him ever since I was old enough to realize my parents loved him more than me. Ethan has always been the golden boy, while I was treated like an afterthought. Growing up, my parents had traditional views that shaped everything about how we were treated. My dad came from a background where sons were seen as the pride and future of the family, while daughters were meant to focus on housework, marriage, and children. That was it. They did not even pretend to treat Ethan and me equally. From the day he was born, it was clear he would always come first. I had always known they hoped for a boy as their first child, but they got me instead. My parents were not cruel in a direct way, but they made it obvious where their priorities were. My brother got the praise, attention, and opportunities that I could only dream of. Ethan, being a self-centered jerk, did not help the situation. He fully embraced the fact that our parents adored him and used it to his advantage at every opportunity. He loved the spotlight and went out of his way to hog it, especially when I accomplished something. He always made sure the focus shifted back to him. I will never forget what he pulled on my 18th birthday. During my party, in front of all our friends and relatives, Ethan announced that he was dating a college senior and planned to drop out of high school to move in with her. Naturally, the room exploded in chaos. My parents were hysterical, my relatives were stunned, and my big day was completely overshadowed. None of what Ethan said was true. He admitted later it was a joke, but the damage had been done. That was just the kind of person he was. Ethan lived to be the center of attention, no matter who he hurt in the process. Once I left for college, I did not look back. I came home only when it was absolutely necessary, and my parents seemed fine with that. They had Ethan with them, after all, and he was all that mattered. Even when Ethan left for college, the difference in how they treated us was crystal clear. For me, they threw a small farewell with just family and a couple of friends. For Ethan, they rented out a restaurant and invited everyone they knew. I realized early on that I was on my own as soon as I became an adult. My parents would not spend a dime on me unless they absolutely had to. The only reason they agreed to pay for my college tuition was that my dad could afford it, and I think they liked the idea of still having some control over me. I guess they figured they were investing in a future they could manipulate. After graduating from business school, I found a great job right away. I was an excellent student, so it was not hard. I made it clear to my parents that I planned to pay them back for the tuition someday, but it would take time. That annoyed them because they had expected me to start looking for a husband as soon as I finished school. My mom, especially, hated the idea of me working. She told me more than once that I needed to get married soon because no man would want me if I became too old and too independent. It was frustrating to deal with, but I stood my ground. I told her I valued my independence over anything else. She was upset for a few weeks but eventually gave up when she saw I would not budge. By the time I paid off the tuition, I felt there was no point in keeping up appearances with my parents. It was clear that Ethan was their only priority, and I was tired of pretending otherwise. I stopped visiting them as much. Every time I did, they either pressured me about getting married or went on and on about how proud they were of Ethan. Ethan had graduated from business school too, but he was nowhere near as successful as me. From what I knew, he spent most of his college years partying and barely scraped by academically. My dad even had to hire him because Ethan could not find a job on his own. Yet, my parents never stopped bragging about him. It was maddening. I had achieved so much more than Ethan, but my parents could not care less. I was earning more, working harder, and thriving in my career, while Ethan had a cushy position handed to him by our dad. Still, they never acknowledged my achievements, and I got used to being treated as second best. After paying off my debt to my parents, I focused completely on my career and personal growth. I cut down on visits to their house because being around them felt suffocating. Every time we met, it was the same old routine, endless praise for Ethan and constant nagging about why I was not married yet. Honestly, the bragging about Ethan was laughable. He had a degree, sure, but he barely managed to graduate because he spent all his time partying. He could not even get a job without Dad stepping in and hiring him at the family company. From what I heard, Ethan barely did anything at work, but he still collected a paycheck. Yet, my parents acted like he was some sort of genius. I should not have been surprised. That was how it had always been. The only reason I stayed in touch with them at all was because I owed them money, and it felt wrong not to keep things civil while I was paying them back. Once the debt was cleared, I let the relationship fizzle out. They did not make much of an effort to reach out either, so we naturally grew apart. Fast forward a couple of years, and I started working on a business idea with my coworker, Ryan. The two of us spent months brainstorming and fine-tuning our plans. After a lot of hard work, we came up with a solid business model and decided to take the leap. Ryan and I knew we needed funding, and we explored all our options. I ended up considering my parents as potential investors. It was not an easy decision, given our history, but my dad was a skilled businessman. I figured if we presented a strong enough case, he might set aside the personal stuff and invest purely for the opportunity. When I approached my parents, I made it clear that I was coming to them as a businesswoman, not as their daughter. To my surprise, they seemed impressed with what Ryan and I had put together. My dad even said it was a brilliant idea and agreed to invest, though he wanted to finalize things after his lawyers reviewed the plan. Ryan and I were thrilled. My parents' investment would cover the bulk of what we needed, so we threw ourselves into getting everything ready. For months, we balanced our regular jobs with building the foundation of our business. We worked late nights and sacrificed our weekends to ensure everything was perfect. Finally, after months of effort, my dad told me he was ready to move forward. He said he was impressed with our progress and would start the paperwork soon. Ryan and I were so confident in the deal that we put in our 2 weeks' notice at our jobs the very next day. But a couple of days later, my parents called me to their house and dropped a bombshell: they had changed their minds. They were not going to invest in the business after all. I was stunned. I had to know why, so I pushed them for an explanation. That is when they told me the truth: Ethan had convinced them not to go through with it. He told them the business was a bad idea and doomed to fail. I could not believe it. Ethan had waited until we were practically done with all the groundwork to sabotage me. I realized he had planned it that way to pull the rug out from under me when I was too far in to turn back. I was furious. I yelled at my parents, called Ethan every name in the book, and stormed out of the house. Back home, I broke the news to Ryan. He was just as devastated as I was, but we knew we could not give up. Ryan was incredibly supportive, even though the setback hit us both hard. He suggested we try to take back our resignations at work, but I could not bring myself to do it. I had already committed to this dream, and I was not about to let Ethan ruin it for me. We decided to look for other investors. It was a long shot, but we pitched our idea to anyone who would listen. We knocked on every door and worked harder than ever to sell the vision we believed in so deeply. After weeks of hustling and sleepless nights, we finally secured enough funding from other investors to move forward. It was not as much as we had hoped for, but it was enough to get us started. Those first few months were brutal. We poured everything we had into the business, working around the clock and stretching every dollar. There were moments when we questioned if we were doing the right thing. But eventually, all our hard work paid off. After a few months, we broke even, and things started to fall into place. From that point on, we kept growing. Our business thrived, and the sacrifices we made felt worth it. Looking back, I could not help but feel grateful that my parents and Ethan had backed out. Their involvement would have tainted our success, and I would have hated to share credit with people who did not believe in me. Cutting ties with my family became one of the best decisions I ever made. Without them in my life, I felt lighter and more focused. I did not have to pretend to care about their opinions anymore or endure their constant comparisons between me and Ethan. For years, I did not hear a word from them. It was peaceful, and I thought that chapter of my life was finally closed. But then, out of nowhere, they showed up at my door one Sunday afternoon. When I opened the door and saw my parents standing there, I was taken aback. It had been over 3 years since we last spoke. Part of me wondered if they had come to apologize and try to make amends. For a split second, I thought they might actually want to repair our relationship. But of course, that was not why they were there. They had heard about how well my business was doing, and now they wanted to invest. They did not even bother with pleasantries. My dad got straight to the point, saying they had been following my success and thought my business was a good opportunity. My mom chimed in, saying they wanted to be part of what I had built. I could not help but laugh. The audacity of it all was almost impressive. They genuinely thought I would welcome them with open arms after everything they had done. I told them flat out that their investment was not needed or wanted. My dad looked shocked, like he could not believe I would turn him down. He started stammering, saying I owed him respect because he was my father. Respect? I said, unable to hold back my frustration. You have not shown me respect my entire life. Why should I give you what you never gave me? My mom started crying, saying they had made sacrifices for me and that I was being ungrateful. She even said that letting me go to college had been a mistake because it had made me too independent and arrogant. It was like listening to a broken record. They went on and on about how I had embarrassed them and how I should let them invest to make things right. They clearly cared more about appearances than actually making amends. Finally, I had enough. I told them to leave or I would call the police. My mom wailed even louder, but I was done listening. I physically escorted them out of my apartment and slammed the door behind them. After I slammed the door, I leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. My parents, who had never believed in me or supported me when it mattered, had shown up, expecting me to welcome them back with open arms. The nerve of it all left me both furious and amused. A couple of hours later, my phone rang. It was Ethan, calling from a number I did not recognize since I had blocked his usual one. Against my better judgment, I answered, curious to hear what he had to say. The moment I picked up, he launched into a tirade. He accused me of disrespecting our parents and claimed I had physically harmed them by pushing them out of my apartment. He even threatened to sue me unless I apologized. I laughed out loud. The idea that he thought he could intimidate me was almost funny. Good luck with that, I said, before hanging up and blocking the new number. Over the next few days, the fallout began. My relatives, most of whom I had not spoken to in years, started posting about me online. They painted me as an ungrateful, selfish daughter who had turned her back on the family that raised her. At first, it got under my skin. I worried about how the negativity might affect my business. What if clients or investors saw these posts? The thought was enough to make me consider just apologizing to make it all go away. But then I talked to Ryan. He reminded me that apologizing would not fix anything. They are not mad because they are hurt, he said. They are mad because you refuse to give them control. Even if you apologize, they will just find something else to complain about. Ryan was right, and I knew it. So, I made a decision: I would not engage. I blocked every relative who joined in on the hate campaign and ignored all the noise. Update 1, a week later. It has been a week since my parents showed up uninvited and my brother threatened to sue me. At first, I felt overwhelmed by the backlash, but now I am starting to see it for what it is: a desperate attempt to guilt me into submission. The more I think about it, the more I realize how freeing it is to have cut ties with them. For the first time in my life, I am truly living on my own terms. My business is thriving, I am surrounded by people who actually support me, and I am no longer wasting energy trying to earn the approval of people who will never give it. Many of you have asked why I stayed in touch with my family for so long, given how they treated me. Honestly, I think it was because I wanted to believe in the idea of family. My parents were not always terrible. There were moments of kindness and connection that I clung to, hoping they would outweigh the bad. But Ethan? He was always a problem. He has been manipulating situations to his advantage for as long as I can remember. Convincing my parents to back out of my business deal was not just cruel, it was calculated. He wanted to see me fail, and that is something I will never forgive. Update 2, 2 weeks later. I talked to Ryan again about the situation, especially my fears about how the online posts might affect our business. He reassured me once more, saying that as long as I stay focused and professional, no one who matters will care. Let them throw their tantrums, he said. Eventually, they will get bored and move on. His advice gave me peace of mind, and he was right. Over time, the posts started to slow down, and the drama began to fade. My relatives, realizing they were not getting the reaction they wanted, moved on to whatever else was going on in their lives. Out of curiosity, I decided to check up on Ethan. I had cut off all updates about my family years ago, but now I wanted to know what he had been up to. From what I gathered through mutual friends, Ethan was still working at my dad's company, in the same position he started in years ago. Apparently, my dad's company had recently been acquired, and there was talk of layoffs. It made me wonder if Ethan was feeling the heat and whether that was why he had tried so hard to insert himself into my business. Without my dad's protection, Ethan might finally have to face the consequences of his incompetence. Update 3, a month later. It has been about a month now, and things have finally quieted down. My parents, Ethan, and the rest of the family have stopped trying to contact me. Blocking them and refusing to engage turned out to be the best decision I could have made. In other news, my dad's company was officially acquired, and they threw a huge party to celebrate. While I have no direct confirmation, I would not be surprised if Ethan is on thin ice now. Without Dad pulling strings, I doubt he will keep his job for much longer. On a personal note, I am happier than I have ever been. My business is thriving, and I am surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. For those of you wondering about my love life, I do have a boyfriend. We have been together for a couple of years now, and things are great. In fact, we are talking about getting married next year. And guess who will not be invited to the wedding? My family had every chance to treat me with respect, but they chose to undermine me at every turn. Now they can live with the consequences of those choices while I focus on building a life I am proud of.